is certainly different. How has that impacted the work of Ectel, and how is Ectel preparing itself to continue its mandate?
Indeed, much has changed in 15 years. And I think when we started off Ectel, we were looking strictly at increasing, of course, liberalizing the market was the issue then, of having more service providers. And then we were able to do that. So we accomplished that by increasing the number of service providers in our space. In recent time, we have had to contend with some of the, and of course, during that period as well, it was mainly fixed line telephony. And we were just breaking into the market of mobile telephone. But that has changed with the rapid rate at which the technology is changing. And so now we have had to contend with matters of the number portability, which is a matter before us now, so that if a person has a telephone number with one service provider, they could easily transit to the other provider without having to get a new number, because people know you, your family's business, people know that particular number already, they have it in the systems. So you'll be able to have a smooth transition between the service providers. And of course that will influence the prices and so on that you pay for termination rates and that sort of thing. We also now have to contend with, and I'm sure you've heard it in the public will have heard that in the news coming up, the question of net neutrality. And so that the service providers, of course, have tried to push back by restricting certain types of systems being used over their system. For example, things like WhatsApp, I'm sure you've heard that too, where some service providers have attempted to block that, and we have come out forcefully and said that could not be, and we have been pushing forward for us to have net neutrality. We have also issues to do with now that the broadband development and more people having access to broadband, and this is important for the economic development of our region. It creates opportunities for development of technology, and that we now, of course, still use a lot of people downloading things off the internet or downloading a lot of information, including now the other factor that is changing rapidly is that to do with cable television systems, where now you have offerings of various services that you can access, and would be creating problems for us as a service regulator. So we have to treat with all these matters that are now emerging. And the way to deal with that is in the form of managing the regulatory environment by having the appropriate legislation and the regulations in place. And so we now have been considered the new Electronics Communications Bill, the draft, which is being considered at the level of the at Ectel, and it is now with the OECS Secretariat, so that for onward transmission to the member states. We now too have to manage issues to do with the competition and acquisitions, and that is a challenge for a number of regulators globally, because as we speak and daily, you will find that there are so many mergers and acquisitions, so that service providers are trying to find ways that they can continue to make profit, and they could continue to remain relevant in the space, and of course at the same time trying to offer improved services to the consumers. So we have to be on trying to keep up pace with that, although the technology is way ahead of us. And so there's new regulations, and in addition the competition law in our region. So we have had to deal with those, and we have had training for the NTRCs in areas of competition law and so on, as well as the new area of number portability. That's an area that Ectel helps us, and that's the strength of Ectel, to be able to offer those services as a unit and to keep the cost down to our individual members.
Okay, what sort of provisions are contained in the new electronic bill as far as the empowerment of the consumer is concerned?
Well, the bill is a far-reaching set of new provisions to address a number of issues. There's strong consumer protection provisions in the bill. What we have been doing in the last year with the support of a project called the CARSIP project, is the Caribbean Infrastructure, Regional Infrastructure Project. They have provided support to Ectel. It's really, again, support through a loan from the World Bank by the countries and some grant funding, to really help us strengthen a lot of the weak areas. Among them would be consumer protection. So in addition to improving provisions in the bill itself, there are new consumer protection regulations being developed. There are also areas dealing with wholesale services, which a lot of commentators in the industry feel that is something we have to address, because if you address wholesale properly, you can't really have a positive impact on retail. So issues of how you regulate undersea fiber. Another very important issue is access to networks, where some providers have laid out extensive physical networks. And you want to be in a situation where if a new provider, a new entrant comes in, they can have access to where you have a lot of duplication or redundancy in these networks on a cost basis to the new entrant to provide services because we think it's necessary that one has to understand the changing dynamics of the industry. Somebody who owns infrastructure may be interested in just that. Somebody who wants to deliver a service may not be interested in owning any massive infrastructure. So you must have a system whereby these providers can actually be able to utilize the infrastructure available for some kind of sharing arrangements to deliver very high quality services, whether it's mobile or through a fixed line, to people at an affordable rate. Because as we develop in a sector, those who are coming in are coming with new ideas, not repeating the mistakes of the past, so they can improve on both service delivery as well as reduce cost of services. So these are some of the general provisions. It's a lot of work that has been done over the last few years, and as Director Jean has said, we are closing in on just getting these bills to the parliament in the respective countries to be passed.
So you expect or anticipate that this will become law and become operational within the next year or so?
This is our expectation. In fact, lawmaking is not really our forte. We develop the recommendations and it goes to the parliaments, but we think these matters have been particularly pertinent to the countries that all the parliaments will see it fitting that they deal with it at some level of urgency.
Okay, very informative discussion. Your closing comments as we come down towards the end of our allotted time?
Well, I have a few closing comments. There was some more information I wanted to share.
Go right ahead.
Which I could, but I would like probably Craig to speak, at least from the public perspective, to understand the spectrum, managing spectrum in our region.
Okay, great.
Because I think it's important.
So we'll do that, and
yeah,
then Mr. Jean, and then you would end.
Okay, in terms of managing spectrum, because the last time I basically spent a lot of time on the Universal Service Fund.
Right.
In terms of managing spectrum, we're responsible for all of the spectrum in our jurisdiction, right? From as low as 88.1 megahertz. So that includes the radio stations, the ultra high frequencies, the GSM band, the station to transmitter link. So basically, we manage the spectrum as it relates to different industries. So for example, radio stations would be responsible for ensuring that Kyrie FM, DBS, Q95 do not transmit at power levels above what the frequency authorizations mandate them to transmit at. We'd ensure that their bandwidth, the quality of the signal fits within a certain profile so that it doesn't create undue noise interference. So these sort of investigations are ongoing because we find a lot of violations throughout the year. We address those violations and we have them corrected by interfacing with the radio operators. In terms of the mobile operators, they use a lot of frequencies in the GSM band. Line, for example, would be in the 850, 1900. Digicel would be in the 900, 1800 band. And some of these bands are pretty close to each other. So we'd have to ensure that they're using the frequencies that they're allowed to use and not more than that, so that any other competitor coming into the market can have the necessary bandwidth to operate. For example, when Orange was in Dominica, Orange was sharing a certain band with Digicel is in order for them to provide service to the consumer. So you have to make sure that all of these frequencies are properly documented, properly allocated, and properly managed to ensure that all the players can survive within this environment. And there's no wasteful use of that resource, because if this resource is squandered, then it hinders what Ectel can do in terms of providing competition in the market and allowing for new entrants into the market. And whilst we're on spectrum, I need to mention about this 700 megahertz band, which is a band that is highly sought after, because what the operators are claiming is that by using this band, they'll be able to provide something called mobile broadband. So instead of you being tethered to the internet at your home for 2 megabit, 5 megabit download speeds, you'd be able to have that wirelessly. So you'd have broadband on the go, basically. And we've just passed the regulations. It's been a long time coming, but we've just passed the regulations for this, and it should be gazetted sometime soon. So right after that is done and becomes public notice, the Limes, the Digicel, we have a new company called Wikibuli, we have another company on the horizon called Green Dot, and a few others. They'll have an opportunity to submit applications for that particular band frequency to provide the services to the public. So in a nutshell, that's it on the spectrum, but spectrum is just one of the vital resources that we manage in our society. The other thing we manage is the numbering plan. So all of the providers would have certain central office codes that they'd be responsible for and be required to apply to the NTRC for these codes, like 235, for example, which is cable and wireless flow central office code. That would be assigned to them by the NTRC. 616 with Digicel, for example, will be assigned by the NTRC. So numbers are another resource that we're responsible for. And the third resource is the domain name registration. That's a particularly teething problem. The law mandates that the NTRC manage that resource, but it has been extremely difficult for us to put the necessary infrastructure in place. Not infrastructure, sorry, we have the infrastructure in place, the necessary rules and contract arrangements in place for us to have that situation completely resolved. We're actively working on it. We have the backing of the Minister of Telecommunications in terms of getting this resolved, and hopefully it's something that we will be able to get finalized by the end of this year, maybe mid 2016. And it's important to get this done, because domain names basically is the benchmark on which the internet rides. Every time you go to a website, you need to enter a domain name into that website, and there are domain names associated with .dm that the NTRC should be managing, and there are a lot of policy decisions we can make around this that would basically buttress the internet provision and make internet deployment much more expedient in our market.
Thank you. Great stuff, Mr. Jean.
Well, we want to thank the GIS for the opportunity to be able to reach out to the public in Dominica in particular, and the wider Ectel space in general. One of the mandates that the board has given to the authority is that we need to be able to communicate the good work that we are doing for the people of the region. Our governments have a platform of the Council of Ministers where we report to them. And we also are accountable to the public. Our service providers who are licensed under us, they also are very well aware of how to get to us and to resolve their matters. But I think our consumers are yet to be able to make very good use of the opportunities that are there for them to lodge their complaints or to make recommendations on the way they would like the sector to operate within our space. And so I also take this opportunity to urge our public to make better use of our NTRCs, to lodge their complaints and to make recommendations on the way things are going so that we have that sort of interaction and feedback. I think too often our public tend to go to the media houses with their complaints, and it is not the forum necessarily that will help to resolve a problem. I think there's a formal system and we have to make use of it. It is there, it is regulated, and we have to encourage the public to make use of it. But we ourselves have a responsibility.
He said it, Mr. Just said it. The only way we can solve a problem for you is if we know what the problem is. You need to tell us exactly what the problem is. You know, there are all technologies now to capture a problem. You have screenshots, you could record. If you don't like writing, you could get somebody to write for you. I mean, there are ways of doing it, but essentially the problems can be solved if we know what the problems are. Secondly, I think we need to realize that there have been tremendous benefits